Meet Jay Peterson, an actor, stuntman, and a United States Marine Corp veteran who served in Iraq and Afghanistan.
After years of working in movies as an armorer, Jay stepped away to focus on acting and eventually wrote a fantasy novel called Renfield Blues, the first Grunt's Grimoire.
Welcome to Scratch Claw Push, a podcast about artists clawing out a place for themselves in the world. I'm Billy Jo Cones.
And I'm Brendan Duke. Let's go. Well, welcome to the show, Mr. Jay Peterson.
Hey, how you going?
All right, so we like to begin every show with a thing we call the 60-second intro. Consider this your verbal resume, the one-pager, not the full CV. Billy's going to give you 60 seconds, and you're going to tell us who you are and what you do. Think of it like blackjack. You're going to try to go right up to it, but not over. And after that, we deep dive. So, Billy?
Fair enough.
All right.
Hey, I'm Jay Peterson. I am what they used to call a character actor. I didn't plan on specializing in supernatural creatures, but that's kind of been a theme throughout my career, and now it's what I'm known the most for, especially with The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It. I'm one of the demons in that particular film right now. I am also a author as of earlier this year. My first novel, Renfield Blues, just came out back in June, and I'm rolling along with that. I am a former fight choreographer, armor, that sort of thing, but crossed the Rubicon into just doing acting on the performance side. And that is me.
All right. You had 15 seconds left. Good job.
Wow.
Nice.
All right.
And so, as you mentioned, you were in, was it The Conjuring? The Devil Made Me Do It.
The Devil Made Me Do It, yeah.
And y'all may not recognize that because, he used to have these long, luscious locks that he's had to
my
shave
hair was
off
down to
from.
here.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I remember your hair was super long for that.
Oh, yeah.
And you didn't have the beard, if I recall. So
No, I had everything below the eyebrows shaved for that one. Because I was playing a corpse in a morgue that was just lying on a slab, and the main villain used it as a weapon. Pretty much sent a demon to possess it and use that to attack the heroes.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what was that like?
That was definitely an experience. It was the biggest movie I'd ever done to date. It was my first nude scene, and that's always a big thing to get over, and my most extensive makeup to date. But it was really cool. There were a lot of fun people to work with there, and it looked awesome on screen. It's really been good for me. So,
How long did the makeup take to do?
About 5 hours on and 2.5 hours off, and it was a 3-person job. So
we should note for the people at home, you are what 6'7"?
I'm 6'7", 300 and change at this point. So and
that's a lot of surface area to cover.
Yes, it is. So I'd get in around the same time as Patrick and Vera did, but they'd focus on their close-ups and everything while I was in the makeup trailer. And I usually was there and able to get a shot before lunch and then do my stuff in the afternoons for principal photography. And then in reshoots, I actually got another scene. There was a character that I got cut completely, and I wound up getting one of his scenes that needed to establish something. So they brought me back. They were going to do it just a year later, but then COVID happened. So I didn't wind up filming it until February of 2021. And we filmed most of this in the summer of 2019.
It's a bit of a time jump.
Yeah, it was, but still fun to do and good people. I loved working there, and the biggest thing was having to stand up that entire time. It wasn't like 5 hours in the makeup chair. I had to stand up and get painted like a house.
Yeah, I was wondering, did you actually get to lie down, or did they have, you've answered that
For
question
the first
now.
about 20 minutes, getting the autopsy scar glued on I could sit down for that. Everything else, it was full body and all over the place.
Just lots of padding with or do they have to get like something bigger to
The first
cover
couple of layers was sponges, and then they go out into airbrushing for things like veins and pooled blood. That's when you're dead, your your heart stops pumping, and blood just goes to the bottom of of wherever you're lying because gravity. So whatever of you is on the ground is going to look like black purple and that sort of thing, and everything else looks paler.
So I assume you had to get pretty cozy with your makeup artist then, as you said.
Pretty much. I mean, I had the modesty sock, but they were all extremely professional, and and after the first 20 minutes, you really stop caring.
Yeah.
It's more of, all right, I agreed to do this. Everyone's being cool with it. Yeah, I'm self-conscious, but here we go. And after that, it's more about trying not to fart than it is wondering about what people think about it.
That's something I never thought about. I did some artist modeling at one point for an art class, and I never really thought about that, but I did think about the sweat that sometimes, because they'd have a heater behind me, and sometimes the sweat would run down my thighs, and I'm like, like trying not to move.
It was having to do that and then go do stunts in this and then get it all taken the way off. So my feet were kind of hurting after the 2 days it took to shoot it.
Yeah, but, I imagine that's a long time on your feet.
Yeah, it was the prep time took about 2 days. It was a cross between like getting ready for a doctor's appointment, getting ready for a hot date. Like, you shave everything below the eyebrows, you stop eating problematic food, and then you go in and you get ready to go.
I love that. So as a fellow actor who's done a lot of ridiculous auditions, I'm very curious what the audition was like for that. Is that something
this
you can
was a live stunt audition. Me and two other guys, one of them was the late John Capp. I've forgotten the other guy's name, but we went down to it was still called Pinewood at the time, Trilith, to meet with Glenn Foster, the stunt coordinator. And we were all asked, okay, you're going to do a zombie walk that's a full out run and then stop like you've been shot in the head and collapse. What are you going to do? And we were all like, well, the first thing we're going to do is put our knee pads on. They're like, here's the thing about that. So we spent a lot of time, running and falling into mats and doing a lot of movement and those little tweaks. It's the difference between a Predator and a Terminator is seeing how those walk, how those run. And it turned out that I wound up getting offered the job after that one.
Yes, you had kind of an unusual path to, getting in this. Like even though you, looking at your background and your resume, you got the theater degree from Georgia State, but then you went into the Marines.
Yeah, back when Georgia State had a theater degree, that got eliminated in some budget cuts along the way. Basically, I've been a theater kid my entire life. I was a Renaissance Festival brat, so performing is definitely in the blood. And when I graduated, I didn't want to go to New York. I didn't want to go to LA, but there was a war on. So I was like, okay, I'll do this. And enlisted, became a machine gunner by trade, saw the world, blew up a few chunks of it. And I was lucky enough that I got out just as Georgia's film tax breaks started kicking in. So I kind of hit the ground running there and never stopped. And I'm still here to this day. And
so did having seen all the stuff that you saw overseas make dealing with the Hollywood stuff easier?
Yes and no. I've always been okay. I never had to do anything that violated my own ethics. I don't have PTSD, which surprises a lot of people. But I was definitely worried about Hollywood's judgment because, the war was not popular. Neither was the Bush administration. And there was a long stretch where veterans were treated as either villains or victims. We couldn't be heroes at all. So that was a hurdle to kind of, and we couldn't be, ordinary people who were just doing a job. So that was kind of a hurdle to get over. And I'm like walking on tiptoes, trying not to scare people because I want to work. It helped a little because I was doing more fight choreography than performing back in those days. I was a choreographer armor for about 10 years. And there they kind of expected it of me. If they knew up front that I had this real world background, they were cool with it. It's if they approached me as an actor and got surprised with it, that it was like, gods, who are you? I don't even know you. It got kind of ridiculous there.
So do you think that...
Sorry. Go ahead, Billy, please.
I was going to say, do you think that that's changed? Because Adam Driver is a veteran, right? Do you think
he is? He didn't see combat, but he is a veteran. He wound up getting medically separated. I think time and distance has kind of cushioned that a little bit. That, and I think movies about the subject just never really made money. Like, everybody wanted to make the next Born on the 4th of July, and they came out with a lot of, Bush sucks, and these movies sucked. They really did. I mean, Green Zone and Stop Loss and everything that really, they didn't make any money. They didn't further careers. Occasionally, you'd get something that was a autobiography, like American Sniper or... the one with Mark Wahlberg, I'm blanking on it.
No, that's not Active Valor. That was Lone Survivor.
Lone Survivor, yeah. Well, when you get these people's real stories and they became biopics and the makers were very respectful of them, those did really well, especially in flyover country. But they did really good on the coast as well. So I think that kind of time and distance really came through there. My the movie I did that got me into SAG, Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk. It's a 2010 movie based on a 2007 book set in 2004, where a army unit winds up getting taken home on like a USO tour and shows up at the halftime of the Super Bowl. And that was really kind of middle of the road. It showed about, how this affected people, and they weren't heroes and they weren't villains. They were just trying to do their thing. Unfortunately, it came out right between Moana and Doctor Strange, and nobody saw it in theaters.
Yeah, you can actually see my brother a lot in that. He's, I think he's an extra, but he's like right behind one of the main characters. He's got his face painted like half blue and half silver, so...
I was actually an extra for about a week and a half on that show. I'd just gotten fired from my corporate job, and I was like, oh, extra work. This is the easiest money I'll ever make. And they needed somebody in the opposing team's colors to scream obscenities at Steve Martin. So apparently I just looked like the drunken butt munch they needed. So implying exactly what the Dallas team did with horses is the line that got me into the union. My mother is so proud.
Unless you're a Cowboys fan, I think you probably be allowed to skate on it.
I think it was just generic Dallas. I don't know if they were even allowed to call them the Cowboys.
I don't know, but they definitely had the colors, because I remember my brother showed me pictures, and he said that they like one night he went home, and I guess his roommate didn't know what he was doing, so he walks in there with his face completely painted and scared the shit out of him. So
I think they had the colors, but not the logos.
Right. I don't remember this like seeing like the star there. So I mean, that was one of those clever, how they kind of like slightly fudge it for the sake of not having rights to license it out.
So you mentioned going from, and just want to change trajectory a little. You mentioned going from being in the military, and then you mentioned a corporate job and getting fired, and going into acting. I've been an actor my whole adult life. And one of the things that this podcast that interested me in talking to people in this podcast was the idea that as actors, so often we're just like sitting around twiddling our thumbs. I'm not saying everybody. This is not the best path, but a lot of us just sit around and twiddle our thumbs and wait for our agents to call and wait for another audition to come in or whatever. And you know, I know a lot of people who do that. And then there are people who really get out there and are constantly working, making work for themselves, making opportunities through networking or through creating something or whatever. So I'm just curious with the corporate job, was the corporate job where you went after the military, or how did you, I guess, was there anything in your life where you kind of started going, I can't sit around and wait by the phone, I have to do something?
The corporate job actually happened after I went my second round of academia after the with the GI Bill, because I came back to civilian life in the middle of the recession. Great. But the GI Bill, let me stave that off for a little while. And then I wound up just working in this warehouse, and they wanted to promote someone internally, and I wound up doing that corporate job there. It was fairly low level, but when do actors have salaried day jobs? So I hung on to that for about a year and change. No, about 2 years. Until the horrible mismanagement kind of got to me. I never really had the guts to quit, but I did just kind of drag along until they were forced to fire me. Just I got tired of the entire thing, and when it did, Billy Lynn fell into my lap, and the various survival hustles came along, and that just kind of freed me, even as it kind of threw me into the deep end.
What survival hustles?
Just about anything. I've been a chess coach. I've been a bouncer. I've worked at an acting school, which is something that a lot of actors wind up doing, getting that adjacent to the industry side hustle that never quite works as well as you think it will, but sometimes it's work. Right now I'm hosting trivia night on a regular basis, so that gets me out of the house, gives me a little audience, and works for me there. I've seen what you were talking about of twiddling your thumbs versus getting out and doing something. That's kind of a perilous road that I've noticed. It's the question of art versus commerce, which I think happens with a lot of artists, is they want to be artists more than they want to make a living making art, if that makes any sense. I see this happen in a lot of actors who they keep getting lowballed and taking jobs for free and what have you, because they want to act more than they want to be a working actor. But if they draw that line in the sand, they act less, and where does that creative juju go? Because it does build up inside you if you don't give it an outlet somewhere. That's kind of what writing did for me. When I'm waiting between auditions, I'd never thought of writing fiction, but I wound up doing a few short things on Facebook. I'm like, hey, this is a non-collaborative art that I can do on my own terms for me, and not have to wait for some casting director to look at my headshot and go, yeah, this guy. And just took that and rolled with it.
So at what point, or I guess how far into that process did you get, writing here and writing there, where you're just like, okay, this thing's got some legs, it needs to be a novel?
It really kicked in when I quit being an armorer, which is its own story. I know we're going on a lot of tangents here. But I was doing fight choreography being an armorer, and because of my military background, I wound up being a specialist in gun work. The tactical workshops, you keep saying, I hate the word tactical. It really is so overused. It just means something you do in the course of warfare or conflict. So I'm like, I used to put a little squirts of Gold Bond powder down my pants before every patrol. That was tactical. And a lot of actors seem to think that it's all the cool kicking indoors and running around with guns and all that fun stuff. But I used to teach actors how to tactical and practical is how I called it, because a lot of these performers are going to be a soldier one project, and then they're going to be a criminal in another, and then they're going to be an ordinary person the next one. So my classes really emphasize that, okay, here's what's keeping you safe as a performer. Now let's see what character choices we can make on top of that. And those worked for what they were. I was actually an instructor for the Society of American Fight Directors for a while. I wrote a lot of essays. I did a couple of short videos saying, no, you don't want to aim a gun loaded with a blank at an actor's head. Here's what it will do.
Mm-hmm.
I used to say, I didn't write the book on using guns in the theater, but I am quoted in it. The Theatrical Firearms Handbook by Kevin Inouye. I'm in there somewhere. I've forgotten the page number. But that came to a head with the Parkland shooting. Because something that kept affecting me while I was doing this, acting as a fight choreographer, I'm also a Second Amendment activist. Well, advocate more than activist. I don't do marches and raise money and all that happy horse shit. And I was noticing the way I was getting treated by the industries, both in the film world and in the theater world. It was cool when it was all tactical and awesome and kicking indoors, but then some asshole would shoot up a school, and all of a sudden, because I knew guns, I'd be the devil. And I'd see this happen day in and day out over the course of years. People who knew me, people who trusted me to take care of them would just flip out every time some psycho went off. And it just got to be a hideous emotional burden. Yeah. So by the time Parkland came in, I was like, okay, fuck this. I'm done. I burned my certificates and left pictures on Facebook and said, okay, screw you all. Anybody who wants to buy my rental stock, send me a DM. It was the crude but accurate way to put it is, it's like being the one who's popular in the back seat on Saturday night, but then you go to church on Sunday morning and nobody wants to make eye contact with you. That's what it felt like the entire industry was treating me. And you can only do that so long before you tell someone to fuck off in the middle of the fellowship hall.
Yeah.
So I did.
Yeah. Sorry, go on.
So I guess it does no good, I'm sure, to point out that you hate guns, but you make millions of movies or hundreds of movies a year where people are just spraying up a whole
I get it from both ends, because over on the gun side you get all of these bubbas going, her, them Hollywood people need to know how you really do these things. Glocks don't have safeties and what have you. And I'm like, any actor whose name you recognize has thousands of hours more training in them than you have spent on the range. And you're going to show up and act like you know what's what and treat them this way? Fuck you, dude. So I'd really kind of get it from both ends, to the point where my wife was noticing that I just slump at the computer after the latest round of stupid. Add in the fact that being an armorer has nowhere near the power it does for the responsibility.
That's a good point.
And this came out during when Rust happened.
Oh, yeah.
Because an armorer isn't even a department head in the crew. They're under the props master, or they're under special effects, or they're under stunts. They're supposed to have all this responsibility to make sure people stay safe, but they have to tiptoe through the tulips with a lot of performers who cherish their ignorance. And
I'd say, especially if your lead actor is also a executive producer on the project.
Exactly. And like everybody else on a set, their real job is getting their next job. So if somebody does get horribly unsafe, screaming at them can mean you're toast. And I think that's exactly what happened with Rust. And that's the dice I rolled every gig I took. And it finally was like, this isn't worth it. I'm walking away. And when I finally did that, that was the cleansing breath that let me focus on acting, that let me put my creative thoughts into writing, it kind of opened up those paths and really let me focus down those. It was hard because I'd spent almost a decade doing this. I was established. I was, getting closer every day, but it just was not worth it. And it was making me miserable.
Like, it's become a theme on this show. Like, I guess like the second life, or, second, almost like the second career for a lot of people. Like, they leave one thing and then become something. And then the second thing that they didn't even set out to do becomes the thing that catches.
I believe it. I totally believe it.
Or the third, or the fourth,
or the third, or the fourth.
We've had some doozies of people that just go from, it's amazing. So when did you leave the armor thing behind?
Just after the Parkland shooting, which I think was February of 2019.
Okay, so it's been it was 5 years.
Yeah, it's been about 5 years now, with COVID time included in there.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
And I stopped being an armor. I also left live performance at the same time because theater is its own brand of screwed up. And I think the pandemic only highlighted that, with, getting people together indoors and whatnot. But that was also when I focused on the commercial side as opposed to the artistic side, where I want to make art, but I need to make money. I got to eat. And film, for all of its ills, does have paths that can be comfortably lucrative.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I focused.
I feel you. I left theater behind in 2016 to focus on voiceover, and same thing. Just knowing that it's something I love doing, but if I want to go back to it, I have to do it for the love of it and not to try to make a living at it, because it's impossible. So
exactly. That's where I get with the whole wanting to act as opposed to wanting to be an actor. I think a lot of people get trapped because they go into theater for the love of it, and that leaves them so open to exploitation and even self-exploitation. The idea that they'll take these jobs that let them do their passion, even if it's really something they wind up paying for, or where they should get paid for, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. And that's kind of where I came from with this whole podcast thing. Was I see people who make their own theater and who feel so much more fulfilled, rather than chasing these theater companies that have clicks that never open up, that they're always like striving, like, oh, well, I had a really good audition and they called me back this time. Well, maybe next year they'll actually cast me, and it's been like 13 years and you still haven't gotten cast by them. And, it's like, at what point do you just go, screw you, I'm doing my own thing? And a lot of people don't, I think, because it takes a lot of initiative and energy and money and things like that to do it. But when you start doing it for yourself, you go, why was I chasing this other thing? That sometimes you get in that, and the click is like so tight that you don't even enjoy it when you're in it, too.
Yeah, I had a relative back when I was still doing armor work who was like, hey, you can be the sword master at this theater company. I'm like, the sword master they got is 47. What am I going to do? Poison him?
I mean, are you a poison master? Then probably not. You'd probably just have to stick him with a sword.
That, and even if you are really working in the theater full time, you're almost always in an administrative position too. I mean, I'm dating myself, but Sean Daniels, when he made Dad's Garage Theater so successful in Atlanta, he was still working as a bartender 4 nights a week.
Yeah.
He's a little bit beyond that now, but it's the idea that you're a working actor in regional theater and that's all you do is complete bullshit. And I don't think people are too scared. I think people are too scared to admit it, because it's like if you point it out, the magic goes away. There's a very distinct feeling of that.
Well, that's kind of what we want to do with this podcast, is try to bust up some of these I don't know, it's not even misconception of just these kind of false notions of like this, you know, that this is like, you just get into the thing and it's all great. And there's certain realities that intrude. And do you find it more freeing when you finally kind of make that thing, like you were talking about wanting to act being versus a working actor? Once you accept that kind of the reality of what that situation is it kind of like, now it's like, okay, now I kind of, you have like you can find that true north and kind of navigate accordingly.
Yeah, what really freed me is when I started being really mercenary about it. It's the whole, I'm an artist, but I tell my students, you are skilled precision labor. Treat yourself accordingly. Because television and film acting very much is a skilled precision, making those tiny little changes according to your direction to get that shot. As opposed to thinking that you're an artist and, it should be free, but I should still get paid, however that works. This imaginary land, as opposed to, I might be an evil capitalist, but I still get to eat when I want to. And I think that's a big hurdle for people to jump over.
Yeah, being a starving artist sounds really romantic until you actually start feeling some hunger pangs.
Until you hit about age 30. I think most people gave up by age 30 to 35, and then it's like, oh my God, like people start realizing they want a family, or people start realizing that they don't have a retirement pension or whatever it is. And
So I'm very much, I'm not all that big a union guy, but the fact that I have a SAG card means that I don't have to do that whole what's your rate, what's your budget kind of gunfight with every producer I deal with. They all know what the bare minimum it'll take to get me out of bed in the morning. And that's so freeing. And that's so just a lift off the shoulders that you don't have to do that dance of, if I go too low, he'll screw me, but if I go too high, they'll get somebody else.
When you know what protections will be in place on set and what you can expect and what you can say no to because of that, right?
Exactly.
But no, so with the novel, so tell everybody a little bit about what the novel's, in your own words, describe, I guess, the premise of the thing.
It started with a character and a world. The world came about when I was very bored in Iraq and started reading books about a kid at wizard boarding school in England. And that particular series ended with a massive battle at a school. And I thought to myself, if that happened in America, it would look like a school shooting. And that gave me the idea of, okay, what if it was? What if something that happened around Columbine was actually a magical battle that just happened to happen in a high school setting? What would happen to the people who survived that? What kind of reactions would happen? What kind of horrible decisions adults would make because they panicked? So that's where the world comes in. It's these survivors of a magical battle that killed half of their graduating class. And they're still feeling repercussions of that as adults. And that met with a character I had that I didn't know about Bob, Agent of Hydra at the time, but it was a similar thought. Someone who was a henchman for the dental plan, who was just working for this villain because that's what paid the bills, survived when the heroes torched the place, but now he's out of a job and just does freelance henchman work. Where, I'll work for evil, but I'm not evil myself. And that wound up becoming my main character. Renfield Blues, which is the title of the novel, starts with my character owing a year and a day of service to a vampire. And he wakes up with a day and a half to go and no memory of the last year. And a woman he's never met making coffee in his kitchen. So now he's on the clock to figure out exactly what he's done, how he can finish fulfilling his oath, and stay alive in the process.
And
So that's
and
the
in that
kickoff
world,
there.
as you quickly establish, breaking an oath has some pretty serious consequences.
Very much the idea that all supernatural creatures have oaths, promises as the coin of the realm, where you hear Shakespeare, by my head, here come the Capulets, by my heel, I care not. That's a remnant of the day where you could wager your head, your foot, your heart, your magic, your life on what you're promising to do. So that's encourages people of all power levels to keep their promises. Otherwise, it turns into chaos. And this particular character swore on his magic to perform this service. But of course, dealing with vampires, what does this service entail?
Yeah, when your boss is by nature, kind of predatory.
There's a lot of consent and how it's granted and what it entails is a big theme in there.
Yeah, and also it's and this is like you come right out of the gate with this. I guess the creed of the Magi. We guide, we guard, we never rule.
Definitely,
which kind of relegates your guy to being, he can never be the guy, but he can always be the guy behind the guy. Like
exactly.
That's probably the highest you'll ever get.
Because a lot of these were responses to problems. Okay, I've got a world of magic. How does magic not take over the world? There has to be something in place that assumes that these all-powerful sorcerers don't take over. So I invented things like the law of the Magi, the idea that trying to rule through magic means magic rules through you, and that always causes chaos and collapse. No, that's not your job. Your job is to handle otherworld problems for humans. To be the one person who knows, oh, they stepped into the woods when they weren't supposed to. Give me a day and a cast iron frying pan. I'll be back. And that idea is pretty much what I picked up and rolled with.
It's kind of like the Superman commandment from the very first movies, like never do that for them, which they can do for themselves. And then
somewhat, I went with the idea that there's always been a shaman or a spiritual guidance or a court wizard or somebody whose job it was to deal with that. The village witch. That's their job. That's what they do. And even though they might be suspect, they're still a part of the community. The idea that this is what you do for your neighbors because they can't do it themselves. The spiritual equivalent of a firefighter.
That's interesting that you say that, because the role you're describing sounds a little bit like your armor position.
Yeah.
Maybe.
You're saying they can't do it for themselves, they need you, but they're also a little suspect, is what that's what you said about the witch, and that's what you kind of indicated that you felt when you were in that position.
It's entirely possible that was flavoring things. I definitely know intimacy coordination definitely had a big effect on that. I'm actually friends with Tonya Sina, who is largely credited with a lot of why intimacy coordination and direction exists. She'd been developing it for several years by the time I met her a few years before I retired. And I actually might have gone into that if things had been different. But I just love the fact that there was a guidance in there, and everything that's changed in the industry so far just still blows my mind to this day. But I also gotten the idea of, okay, in a world with mind control, consent just becomes even more important.
Because you get into that right away, like within the first or second chapter. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because like there's the whole thing where when he has to go recover his memories, he talks to the girl making him coffee.
Yeah, Renfield Blues begins the morning after most fantasy novels end. The hero has already defeated the monster. He's ridden off into the sunset with the girl. Renfield Blues wakes up with, he's got no memory of what happens. He's covered in bruises. He's hung over, and he has no memory of this lady who's sitting in his kitchen telling him what's going on. So when he does experience what would normally be the final battle, it's from the point of view, because he uses mind magic to look into her memories. So he has to experience that final battle from the point of view of the damsel in distress who's tied up naked in the corner the entire time. So that's already a forced change of perspective from the normal heroic fantasy you'd see.
Yeah,
And
I thought that
he
was a
points
good.
out when doing this, can I read your mind? I don't know, can you? Yeah, I kind of expected that. I mean, I'd like your permission to read your mind. Just establishes that, yeah, not asking for permission is a bad thing. Try not to do that.
And I like that you took that tack, because it also has it like looking at it from her perspective when she doesn't know this guy. Like at the point she, she's still kind of getting to know him, but when she first sees him, he doesn't look friendly.
Yeah.
So he's like, there's that moment where he's like, my God, do I really look like that? And
I mean, and yeah, being my size and having resting war face, I kind of relate. Not saying that Travis is a Mary Sue, but I definitely understand his viewpoints.
Yeah. I was trying to describe it to somebody, like, imagine, like we'll just say that English boarding school, saga, but if the main character were a 6'7" Marine, and now go.
Yeah. It was, the Battle of Hogwarts was Columbine, but 20 years later, and they're still having hassles. Go.
Yeah, and it's so like getting into that world building, because again, you're kind of getting into some very well worn, territory. Like how do you decide kind of what to keep, what to change, okay, I'm gonna, or like, so you kind of immediately like going in with the vampire thing. And putting in like, kind of very like a particular kind of modern spin on it. I don't want to spoil too much of it, but there's definitely, you kind of took a tack right away. It's like, oh yeah. And I thought like, well, that's probably very accurate given, the world we live in. And but it's not the traditional, beautiful, sparkly vampires take.
I keep coming back to people are human, even if they're something supernatural. Every supernatural creature we have in literature is based on an aspect of humanity. Werewolves have usually been about primal hunger, about, starvation in years of famine. Vampires have always been kind of parasitic. They might be an allegory for venereal disease or the perils of stepping outside of culture norms. And fairies are about, no, you don't do this when you're among these people. They're about enforcing the social order. They are very powerful people that you don't understand. Be polite to them. So that's where I kind of based all of these on and sat there and went, okay, if this survived into the 20th century, into the 21st, and still remained beneath notice, how would that work? So the idea of, okay, we as modern day humans have figured out the concept of consent and why it's important. A vampire who's 300 years old and still thought, slavery ended last Tuesday and they weren't very happy about that, how would they respond to this? So a lot of that just guided both character point of views and how the world worked. Usually when it came into a roadblock, I was like, okay, how does X prevent Y from happening? Or how does this not get chased to its logical conclusions? And that really guided a lot of the world building with everything from characters to situations.
It definitely has a way of keeping the human element into it. That again, you kind of had to like because I mean, we see it played out in real life. Like, you got the people like, why can't I still say, call somebody such and such? And it's like, well, because that's not cool. Like, yeah, you may have, it's like, again, because that's, forget okay boomer when you're talking to someone who's like 300 years old when things were very, very different.
I mean, my one of my vampires is a pre-Confederate Southerner. And yeah, he looks like the big guy in the white suit who looks like Colonel Sanders and sounds like Foghorn Leghorn. But you got to remember that this guy was around for horrible chunks of U.S. history and considered those means to an end more than anything else.
Yeah, you definitely get into some interesting territory with all that. And
well, just because I'm setting it in Atlanta, whose history is just fraught with all of these, ignoring it just didn't work. At least not if I wanted these people to feel human. So yeah, I've got.
I appreciated that you let Atlanta just be Atlanta with all that entails.
Yeah, I mean, just the racial demographics. It didn't happen because I didn't release until last June, but I had Black Elves before Rings of Power came out. I was already had established that one of my main characters is an elf from the Wild Hunt, and he looks like an ordinary black man under his glamour. So that does affect it, The idea, I have Stone Mountain and the 4th of July celebration and all that entails. The nightclub that gets burned down in the opening chapters is placed more or less where the Masquerade used to be.
That was going to be, but yes, like you went ahead and I was like, did he just burn down the Masquerade? Is that? It's like, did you kind of just throw? It's like, yep, he did.
I mean, it's Atlanta, which was also the where White Wolf was based back in the 90s. So there is a couple of shout outs to the World of Darkness in there too. The idea, vampires own nightclubs. Of course they do. There's probably a zoning code that makes sure that happens.
Yeah, and for those people who don't know, the Atlanta and all the weirdness that it entails. Thanks to shows like Atlanta and some of the stuff that's been recent, like people are finally, I think, the world at large is starting to kind of realize what a fucking weird place Atlanta can be. And which only like works. Yeah. It works perfectly for your book.
I'm amazed I don't really have plans for Lake Lanier because that place is just haunted.
Yeah.
I
think that needs to be in something for sure.
I'm amazed no one's tried to do it. Like Hollywood hasn't done a movie about that yet.
I swear there is.
There's an indie movie about it, but I don't know if there's
some big budget, like, Blumhouse comes down and does some whole thing about it, because the history of that is just ripe for someone to just run with it.
I think oh crap. My brain doesn't hold names, but like like Nope and them. Like I think
Jordan Peele.
Jordan Peele do something with that for sure.
Oh my god.
That would be a great horror movie setting with the whole racial under thing. Yeah.
The show Atlanta touched on it in an episode, but they didn't get too deep with it. Like there, and I saw I don't know if it was a real trailer or if it was something somebody was just cutting together, just to show off their editing skills, about a would-be documentary about it, because I never saw anything come of it after that. But I mean, yeah, that Jesus, Lake, for anyone outside of Georgia, if you go look up Lake Lanier and look up the history, it's pretty dark.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised. I've got a couple of books that are already in the shoot for this, but Lake Lanier doesn't get touched in any of them.
And I also like just throwing another one in there of weirdness. I think there's weirdness everywhere because I'm from Wisconsin and there's plenty of weird there. But the Georgia Guidestones, which
oh my god,
like, that's
yikes,
extremely mysterious and weird. And then the whole destruction of them, it's like, what? I would want to see those.
The people that like put them up.
Yeah, that was. I've been to. I visited them a couple of times, and and then someone blew them up randomly.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm fascinated by that. They never did figure out who put them up, though, did they?
I don't think so.
Because it is like,
I think they went down to like one level of shell corporation, and then the trail vanished.
but it's hinted that it has to do with Rosicrucianism,
Maybe,
right?
I don't know.
There was a theory. I think there was the theory of one of the people who put them up. It's been ages since I've looked into it, but then it wasn't. I don't think it was ever confirmed. But like who they thought that one, I guess like one of the prime suspects. Like it gets weird. Like looking into like, yeah, okay, that person and they're into what? And you're just like, whoa.
Well, the person who went in, I think he used the name Christian Rosencreutz or whatever, and so it's like, oh, okay, interesting. So, yeah, that's not a real name. It could be. I was going to ask, going back to your novel, besides the story about the novel that shall not be named, right? That you didn't name. Besides that, were there other inspirations? Because there's so many different mythologies of these creatures that vary. Was there anything that you pulled from specifically, or was it kind of just, I'm creating my own thing?
I tried to go back to as root a legend as possible, and then kind of spun off from there. My vampires are largely humans who have been turned, and Renfield's, they go back to Dracula's novel. They are mind-controlled servants of vampires who drink vampire blood and have a little bit of resiliency, but largely they don't last because it's not a natural state for a human to be in. So I rolled with that and used living as a Renfield as a metaphor for abusive relationships. And the horrors inherent in not seeking out active consent, and the idea of God, mind control can be a horrible thing, as opposed to, hey, let's let children have access to love potions
or luck potions, or spells that can kill, abracadabra. Yeah.
So whenever I brought in a new character, whether that was an elf or a djinn or even an ordinary witch, I tried to be mindful of, okay, where is the human cultural experience of this? Where does this come from? Especially when it comes to things like cultural magic. I'm like, is there such a thing as an American mage? Or is there a society below that? How big is that society? So I had to kind of sit there and go, okay, how many wizards get born a year? How organized are they? Is there enough for there to be a functioning government? And if so, does it work with mortal ones? So kind of figuring out all that flow. And even if I kept it in the background, it really grounded the way the human characters reacted.
Yeah, that's interesting. I like that you went back to the source. I just read something recently, and I don't know how true it is, some meme or whatever, but it was about like where the traditional look of the witch came from. You ever seen this? They said that it was from women used to be brewers of beer. Like beer was a women's job, right? And so the women who brewed beer, the hat was their brewing, like their hat for like market or whatever, and the broom had something to do with like they put it outside the shop when the beer was ready. I don't know. It was just like, that's really interesting.
That makes sense. I think I've heard. I know what you're talking about. That makes sense. I also kind of tried to ground with the idea that magic isn't a substitute. That's a theme that keeps on going. I've got one character who was badly hurt in that battle. They were actually thrown into a tree and suffered brain damage. And now as an adult, they have a form of aphasia where they can't really speak more than a sentence without being garbled. But they can use telepathy and they can type. With the idea of, there is no magic brain surgery that can fix this.
It's
with
kind of like it's like the ultimate workaround.
well, it's the idea that magic can fix disabilities was something I sat there and went, yeah, no, I'm not going to let people off this easy. Then that really influenced the nature of magic in the world. The idea that it is sciences that we haven't discovered yet, but we only have the most crude rules about. My dad was a chemical engineer, and he used to say, you know, back in my day, there were only 4 elements on the periodic table.
Which ones?
Earth, water, air, and fire.
Ah, I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
So but you still had, you know, blacksmiths who had no clue what a covalent bond was, but they knew that if you took iron and you heated it up in the middle of the night until it turned just this shade of red and beat the snot out of it, you got really good steel. And that's where I think a lot of my wizards are. They're not really sure what the quantum magic is, but they're kind of at the Einstein level of, if you do X, Y, and Z, this happens.
And
I
it's
love
interesting.
that. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. No, and what's interesting, yeah, you getting into it like in that angle, because especially these days with technology being where it is, it's gotten to that level where it almost it's risen to where to like people who just barely know anything about it. Like, yeah, we can surf on our iPhones, but how many of us actually know the mechanisms that make that work?
Mm-hmm. That was the one of my ways of keeping magic from taking over the world. The idea that there was never an information age. There was never a industrial revolution when it came to magic. A lot of this information is still locked up, and a lot of these establishments you still have to discover on your own. The cheeseburger paradox, I think, is how I described it in the book. The idea that, okay, we're here, it's 2024, we're in Atlanta. If you want a cheeseburger, there are hundreds of restaurants in your area code that can make you one however you like. Go back in time 1,000 years, the nearest cow, you can probably find one, but the closest lettuce is either in Siberia or Spain. The closest wheat is probably in Newfoundland. You have to gather all those ingredients, and then you have to know how to make bread to make the bun. You have to know how to make cheese. You have to know how to make sauces. You have to cut and grind meat and do all of this if you want that cheeseburger. For something that modern technology means that I can, call up on my phone and have one delivered right here to my desk.
That's funny that you said that, because that's what I was about to say before. For me, it's about cake, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the idea that like people can follow directions and know how to make a cake, but I'm like, who made the first cake and how did they do that? Because how did they decide, oh, I'm going to take this plant over here, I'm going to take the grains out of the plant, I'm going to crush those, and then I'm going to mix that with the thing that came out of the butt of this chicken, crack that in there, and maybe I'll take these shells out, I don't know, maybe not, maybe it'll add some nice fiber, I don't know. And then they
crunch.
how did they, who discovered that mixing all this shit together, putting it in heat, that it worked? At what point did we evolved to that, and how did that knowledge come about? Because we didn't have chemistry, right? It was just we did these things and we kept improving them until it was perfect, right?
Yeah.
But I'm always fascinated by that, that the people knew how to do all these things without knowing the mechanisms behind it.
Yeah, that's something that's fascinating me. So naturally, I took that and ran with it, and it's really worked so far. Especially modern day that we have maker culture and right to repair. People are taking an interest in how things work and repairing them as a response to fast fashion and no user serviceable parts inside and all that other bullshit that we've had to deal with over the years.
Yeah, you don't have like the 2-year bomb on your phone or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
that once you hit that point, suddenly it's like, he's like, this thing was like lightning fast just 2 days ago. Yeah.
And again, that grounds it into the human experience. And that's what I keep getting told, how people are relating to one character or another, because just because they're magic doesn't mean they're not people. And that's what really attracts readers and gets folks hooked on the story, is that connection.
Yeah. Well, I want to bring it back to kind of your career path and just explore that a little bit more. So, did you self-publish the book?
I did. I formatted on a program called Atticus, and I released it through a self-publishing program called Ingram Spark. That allowed for print on demand of the paperback, and also for ebooks along the various sellers, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, a couple others.
Okay. And did you always sort of intend on publishing when you started it, or did you kind of just not know what you were going to do?
I actually, I wrote another book before this, which was a space western. And I submitted that through traditional publishing, and just didn't get a nibble. Actually, I submitted it right before the pandemic happened, like I think January of 2020. And I knew that I wasn't going to get a response for at least a year, if not ever, and none of them picked it up. So I started working on this other one, and I sat there and went, with this one, I'm going to self-publish. I'm just going to make a grand experiment out of it, decide how I want to release a book, and go from there.
And how does that work? I mean, like, besides, because the thing about publishing houses is they have marketing machines and they have all these things behind them, right? But with self-publishing, it's kind of all on you, right? So how did that work for you?
It probably doesn't work as well as I should. I'm, again, the usual problem with self-marketing is that nobody likes commercials. And I don't really have the budget for internet ads, half of which would be going down a toilet anyway. What I do have is a bit of personal celebrity now that I'm officially a movie monster, so I do kind of leverage that to the extent that I can, and just word of mouth. I've already started looking in genre groups as one of the things that artists really kind of train wreck themselves when it comes to marketing is that they try to market to their peers. Where you're in a filmmaker group and everybody just says, watch my movie. And we're like, we're movie makers too, dude. Right. Writers do that same thing. So I wound up just taking that and getting what word of mouth I could, not burning my own personal infosphere for the sake of getting a sale here or there. Sometimes I just ask, like I went down to Viking Alchemist and said, hey, can I do a book signing here? We've never done a book signing. Well, have you got a slow Thursday? So I went down there and they had a busier than expected Thursday, and it all worked. And, I sold some books. A lot of them were to friends and family. Some of them were to passersby.
Cool. Yeah, I saw a woman last time I flew through the airport here. I saw a woman at the bookstore, one of the airport bookstores, the one that's attached to the weird cafe in the back area. And she was sitting up there, and they're like, the people from the bookstore were like, hey, book signing, come here, come on, like trying to pull people in. I was like, okay, like the author, they're like, she's great. So they were really hustling for her, which I thought was adorable and nice. And but I've also seen authors at, I haven't seen it here. I don't know the culture here like I know it up north, but like in Minneapolis, there's the art crawl in St. Paul. There's the northeast art whirl. Like there's all this artist housing and artist buildings where people have studios. And a couple times a year, they'll have these open studio weekends where you get to come and see people's art and see it all. And they'll have bands and food trucks and all sorts of stuff. And so you just kind of know you're going to go see a bunch of really cool things and buy stuff. And I've seen authors set up at those things sometimes
Yeah.
too.
What I've seen a little more is conventions. A lot of smaller genre conventions that are dedicated to fantasy or science fiction or horror, that sort of thing. I haven't quite dipped my toes into that yet, but I'm going to come close and see what that happens.
So when you mentioned that you've become a little bit known for the movie monster thing, is that something you kind of want to make into a niche for yourself, or do you kind of want to shy away from that? How are you feeling about that?
I'll perform just about anything if the paycheck's right. I can say that I've played 2 more supernatural creatures since then for various films that have yet to come out, and we'll see what happens further than that. I mean, I don't mind creature work at all, and horror fans are absolutely lovely. They're really cool people. I think the idea of knowing what it's like to be different really resonates with a lot of horror fans. And 6'7", 300 pounds, resting war face. I know what it's like to be different. I hit 6 foot at 12, so it's a really fun genre to be associated with. So yeah, I will bring on the critters. I'd love to play a Bigfoot. I actually played a cryptid in a live action event back in October, and that was a lot of fun.
That's cool.
Yeah. We just get you a big hairy suit and go take some blurry pictures of you in the woods.
I mean, yeah, it works.
I would say we would introduce him to Christopher Mim, but he's SAG, so that wouldn't work. But
yeah,
unless Chris decides to go union, but yeah, I don't see that happening in Minnesota.
It is a thing.
We interviewed a friend of mine who only makes 1950s style B horror movies, and he's made a movie a year for the last, what did we say, 15
since 2006, I want to say.
Oh, wow. So even more. Like he's made. I think he was at 19 when we talked to him. Right. He's made a movie a year, a feature a year for the last 19 years or something. Wow. So yeah, it's impressive.
Good on him. I mean,
yeah, if you go look at the list of his movies, you can't not be impressed. I mean, even if just I haven't done the few short films that I've worked on, and how much that takes to do a feature length movie a year. One blows my mind.
Writes, directs, produces. He has 6 children. I don't know.
At least 6 kids.
Wow.
He has 6 kids and a full-time job, and he goes to horror conventions and stuff, and different movie conventions like that. So,
I mean, he's clearly enjoying his passion.
Yep. Yeah, and he got the whole family on it, so that's a way of
hey, there you go.
Not avoiding your family while doing your art.
I was watching some competition show about haunted houses. And these families that just decorated their houses for Halloween, and how elaborate it got, and the kids were right in there with them, and I thought that was a really cool thing to do.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's a little easier to talk your kids into coming and making like a horror movie with you than say if you ran like a grocery store or something. Yeah.
I mean, hey.
Definitely.
Hey, kids, who wants to make some fake blood?
Move these oranges up front. Nah, I'm good.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
So as we are over the hour mark, tell the people where they can find you online if they want to at you.
If I am there, it will be at Jay the Barbarian, however their tags are achieved. My website's jaythebarbarian.com. The social medias that I do have, that name will always lead to me.
Awesome.
All right.
So, Jay, Billy, you got anything you want to throw at him before we sign off? Or
no, no, I think it's yeah. I think we're
Yeah, well,
wrapped up.
Jay, thanks for coming out, man, and we wish you all the success. And we will post a link to the book, which I'm thoroughly enjoying. I haven't finished, but I am thoroughly enjoying it. Like,
awesome. Glad you're having fun.
All right, thanks for coming out.
Thanks for having me. Take care of yourselves.
That will be all for this episode. To keep up with the show, follow us on social media at Scratch Claw Push. If social media isn't your thing, you can contact us at scratchclawpush@gmail.com. To learn more about the show, visit scratchclawpush.com. This podcast has been a Carcutta Media production. This recording, or any portion thereof, may not be reproduced or used in any manner whatsoever without the express written permission of the publisher, except for the use of brief quotations in a review. Copyright 2024 by Carcutta Media LLC, all rights reserved.